Good evening. Welcome everybody back from summer vacation, back to the school year. And I think I forgot to automatically mute everybody. Why is that happening? It's supposed to be in the settings. Okay, if you can mute yourself, please do. For some reason, the settings is not working and it's not muting everybody. Or else I'll mute everybody later. Okay, well, I want to introduce, it's September 9th, 2024. I want to introduce our guest tonight, Michele Garcia winner, who is a very acclaimed name in and near, I guess, the mental health world. Probably has saved many a person from going into mental health crises and challenges due to problems at school, problems in the social world, problems in interpersonal relationships, maybe having gotten bullied, through her terrific curriculum called Social Thinking. Michele is a master's in speech, has a master's in speech and language pathology, and is the author of God knows how many books, about 20 books or something like that. And probably most of you or all of you here have long since heard of her and heard about her and probably familiar with lots of her work. So Michele, thank you very much for agreeing to come on, after this short pursuit. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, and we hope that we can have something productive. As you know, tonight's discussion is really predominantly mental health professionals, so it'll be interesting to see the interplay between the world of speech, language, and social, and how that can actually assist in the world of mental and behavioral health. And as we discussed before the show, that what's unique about tonight is that it needn't be exclusive to children. I know when we think of social skills, we tend to think of children and where they're struggling in their social world. But what if we can expand that beyond the world of children and to the world of adults as well? And how many adults do we know who are really struggling and suffering because of poor social skills? So Michele, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are? I mean, I know that you have a master's in speech and language, but how did you get into this world of social? That's such an interesting niche, and doesn't necessarily, it's not what the first thing one would think of when they think of speech and language.
Well, let me explain two parts. In speech language pathology, there's actually three parts of our field. One is words, the other is sentences, and the third one is how you use them. And that's called social pragmatics. And I think it was originally intended, which was a very language-based approach. How do you use your words and sentences? But if you step back from words and sentences, the majority of our communication is actually nonverbal. It's very much involving our body. And it involves heavily in our mind. So that's kind of, as a speech language pathologist, that's called social pragmatics. And that's what I've ended up specializing in. And I'll just share a story. When I got my master's degree, it was at Indiana University, but I went out there a little bit early and found that they had a program on deinstitutionalizing adolescents with autism. And for whatever reason, I knew nothing about autism, but I was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
I knew a little bit because I volunteered as a kid in San Francisco with Parks and Rec in terms of helping students with disabilities. So I was exposed to it. So I went over and started immediately volunteering with folks who were deinstitutionalized, which turned out that they had intellectual difficulties, language difficulties, and some massive behavioral problems. And so our job was to help them get able enough to live in the community in a group home. And I was lucky enough to be part of a very intensive grant-funded program where we had very compassionate behaviorism, working with these individuals. And I learned a ton about behaviorism. I was a very good behaviorist. And I just had, I admired the leader of our program, Nancy Dalrymple, so much. And so got very involved in that. And then I started my speech and language program, and this was in the 80s. And at that time, nobody was interested in autism. So I went and talked to my professors and my graduate degree program, and they were like, no, we don't do autism. So there was a time when autism was not a thing.
Yeah.
but I had become very skilled at it. And so after I got my master's degree, I moved back to the San Francisco area where I'm from. And I immediately started volunteering in a lot or working in a lot of different facilities. One was with head injury and stroke patients, where I learned a ton about executive functioning. And at that point, the brain mapping was just beginning. And so I was kind of, on the cutting edge of being able to learn a lot of information about our cognition.
Hmm.
And then I ended up, long story short, my children became school age, so I wanted to work in the schools. So I went to work in a high school district because I always like working with older kids. And I had a range of students I was at 3 schools as a speech pathologist. And some of my students were very literal and had very obvious social skills problems. And then some of my students were much more sophisticated. And in fact, when they were put in my social skills group, they were really angry and they were just lashing out. So I became very interested in this group. Why, what's up? Why are you so angry? And they go, we could teach social skills. We don't need to be in this program. And so I started learning more about those kids. And these are the kids who are more subtle in their presentation. So let me just jump in to say autism now, I think everybody knows, is considered a spectrum disorder. And one of the things that I really regret is that we changed that language away from Asperger's, PDD, autism, because those words signal different types of treatment needs. Now that everybody's on the spectrum, it's not clear what to do with anybody. And so I really I don't just refer to the spectrum. In fact, our work really looks at different cohorts of social learners. And you had brought up Temple Grandin, who is incredibly bright and is so good at sharing her message. I used to travel a lot with Temple and her mother years ago when we were all doing speaking together. But Temple is very literal, and she needs some support systems behind her to be able to show up at different events and all of that. She has a very important message to say. She shares it very well. But she has one type of social learning style. And for us to teach somebody like Temple, even if they're not as bright as Temple, we really do need to teach them social behaviors, because they are not great at trying to figure out what's going on around them. So they tend to memorize how to handle things. And that's when you asked me, Moisha, about generalization, that's the type of group that you work on generalization, because they memorize skills in one place. And now you have to teach them, well, when you're in this other place, it's similar but different. You use the same skills. And you're really looking at having them memorize how to do these behaviors.
Okay, so let's take a step back, because you're answering a question that I didn't ask yet, which is, and that's the question of, I mean, if you can teach people social skills. I always struggled with the concept of teaching social skills, because if I teach someone a social skill, they may be able to apply that if they can get a grip on themselves, memorize it, and be emotionally regulated enough in the event, they can remember to apply the social skill that I taught them. But what happens if I teach them a social skill, such as if somebody gives you a drink, you say thank you, right? Then how do they learn to generalize that? But when somebody gives them a snack, not a drink, to say thank you.
Right. Well, this is the group that I am no longer focusing my energies on. And so these are the dilemmas, though, in terms of they do learn, they memorize situation specific, people specific, depending on what to do. And then, age helps too. The longer you're alive, the more experiences you have. And if you've memorized everything, you start to see patterns a little bit more. And Temple is so good about speaking about how she sees things in patterns and has learned these patterns.
So someone like Temple will actually be able to generalize something that she was taught, or does it eventually, I mean, because I think that's what we all do. All of us sort of generalize what we sense and perceive, and over the course of time, we see somebody go like this, we recognize that that means they're not very happy or pleased with us, and we see somebody go like this, we know that they're delighted, and then we sort of step in with the next phase of
Right. Well, I would argue somebody like you has not memorized that. I would say that you have developed social competencies that help you to figure out what's going on with the people in that situation.
So in
You
other words,
know, when
you're saying that this isn't a memorization of a sort of systematic memorization as much as it is a emotional or gut or intuitive. Is that what you mean?
I would say ideally it's intuitive because social for neurotypical folks largely tends to be a pretty intuitive system.
Mhm.
But for somebody who's what we used to call Asperger's, and now we just call high on the spectrum, but those folks have what we call more subtle but significant learning issues, meaning they may appear quite neurotypically and yet be missing out on how to read social situations. And so this is the group I specialize in now, whether they're starting at 4 years old, we have working curriculum all the way through. My oldest client's in his 70s, he's a lawyer, and he drove mental health counselors crazy. So one of them called me and said, he's yours, help him. So I think there's a big difference between teaching social behaviors, which is memorization based,
Mhm.
and what I do, which is teaching social competencies.
So tell us
And there,
about what you mean by that. What does it mean? What do you mean by social competencies, and how do you teach social competencies?
could you allow me
Yeah.
to share my screen for a minute?
You have permission.
All right.
And while you're looking for the slide, I do want to encourage everybody to please, if you have a question, if you know Michele and you want to shout out and wave, you can do that. But if you have a question or a comment or a thought, please raise your hand by using the reactions tab that's changed on the bottom of my screen. And raise your hand and we'll call on you. And I also want to remind everybody that we are sponsored by okclarity.com. If you want to promote yourself, your business, your therapy business, or some of the trainings or work you do, please check out okclarity.com and sign up for a website there, as well as officestreamline.com. OfficeStream is a virtual secretary that does all the paperwork and clerical work that you need. So if you want to save a few hours a week to get in more clinical time, do check out officestreamline.com and hire a virtual secretary. Okay.
All right, it is not allowing me to share it. We didn't work
Not
on that
nice.
ahead of time,
Not
but
nice.
that's okay. All right, what I'm going to explain is what we call our social competency model. So one of the questions is, how do more sophisticated people who are trying to figure out what's going on in a situation. So one of the things we do, each of us does, who is considered more subtle in whether they're neurotypical or subtle with some social learning challenges, is we're all expected to figure out the situation first, right? So we don't walk around looking at someone's face. We look at the situation that they're in. And based on the situation, then we start to figure out what's going on with that person. If I want to talk to this person, is this a good time to talk to this person? Based on what I want to tell them, is this something that I can share with this person just while we walk in the hall, or do I need to plan a different meeting? That we figure out our social goals. And the first thing we have to do is, as we're meeting up with someone, we figure out what's the situation. And we call it the social competency model. Looks at first attend. You use your social attention to figure out what's going on. You interpret, now that you see it, what's happening. And then you have to problem solve. Is this the right time and place for the message? I'm frustrated, but I don't want this person to be frustrated. How do I have to handle myself in order to convey this message? And then the last part of the social competency model, it's usually in a triangle: attend, interpret, problem solve. And the last part is respond. Based on all this thinking, what should I do? Based on what this person's doing, how should I handle that? I attend, I interpret, I problem solve what's going on with them. At the same time, they're doing that with me. they're attending to what's happening around me. And so the social mind is actually really busy at trying to figure out context. We're trying to figure out what's my goal. So if my goal is to say hi, like if I just want to be friendly, I may, like Moisha, if we're in the same building together and we walk by each other first thing in the morning, I'll say hi to you and I'll give a full body hi. But I also have to use my working memory, because the next time I see you, if I give as big a greeting as I gave the first time, that's considered odd. That usually the second time we greet someone, we don't do the whole big body thing. We usually just walk by quietly and, smile at them. And then third or fourth time we see them, we actually don't greet them at all. And so that's part of the whole social thinking process is, have I talked to this person? What's going on around me? That's a pretty simple example. In our interpersonal relationships, we have to, if I want to be talking to someone, I have to figure out not only my perspective, but what do I think their perspective is?
Yep.
And perspective taking has to do with both thoughts and feelings. Right? So we're very emotional. You guys are all mental health. That at ground zero of relationships is more feelings than it is thoughts, right? So we do a lot with
Michelle,
trying to understand that.
you're describing things that seem so intuitive and emotion based, and I'm struggling to imagine how these competencies can be taught. So tell me a little bit more about how could you teach
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing we do, so when I start, whether it's an adult, a teenager, a kid, the first thing we do is have them be observers of situations, and that's it. So if you're at school, we're going to have you walk through the school and notice what's happening, what's going on in the office, or we're going to go on the playground.
When you have somebody who's not neurotypical, notice, or even someone who's neurotypical, the things they're going to notice are the technical parts, right? They're going to see who's sitting where, what color shirt they're wearing, etc., etc. Is that right?
Not necessarily. Like you're going into like a very detailed mechanical, let's pull this apart mechanically. When I'm working with the more subtle group, they're actually not that mechanical in their interpretation. But they often are so overwhelmed with their brain doesn't make it as easy for them as for those of us who it's more instinctual. And so we start by just grounding them by noticing what's happening around them. So like I was working with this kid starting at about 13 years old. He went to an upscale private school and he was academically really bright, but socially he was by himself all the time. And what he thought was that everybody was mean to him. So he came in with, why is everybody so mean to me? And then I started working with him. And first I just started having him like, when you're at lunch, just look around, what's happening around you. When you're walking in the hall, what's happening? And this was like rocket science to him. He had just never even thought about observing people. And so the long story short, in working with this guy, it was really fun for me as a client because he realized he never observed anything. He just reacted. And actually, where he thought everybody was mean to him, he realized that actually he was mean to everybody. He
just from observing that, just from his own stepping out of himself and taking time to look around more objectively, he was able to notice that.
This was a number of this wasn't singularly the treatment, but it was the starting place. And so the first thing we do with folks is say, we're not going to interact. You're not there. The expectation is not for you to interact at all. It's for you to tell me what's going on. If you are confused about what's happening at the coffee shop, tell me what's going on at the coffee shop. If you're confused about what's going on at school, tell me what other kids do at lunchtime. Tell me what they do after lunch. Just be a spy and come back as a reporter. And if you can take notes, that's even better. Write down what you're noticing and bring it back to me. And so for this particular kid, he got really into it. He really could not believe that he was now a teenager and he had never known intuitively to actually notice the landscape in which he existed and the people that were around. And that was such an important
And
place,
this
not
sounds
just
like a
for him.
motivated kid who wanted something better for himself.
Well, he wasn't at first. He came in with a really bad attitude
Mm,
and was like, I'm forced to come here, which is what most of our clients, nobody's too thrilled to be showing up at somebody's social clinic.
mhm.
As a teenager, this is where it's nice to work with adults because they show up really understanding,
Mhm.
oh, it's not my parents' problem. Really,
Mhm.
this is my problem. But this idea of social observation is important, but it's not just observe, it's interpret. And now start to figure out the people. Do they know each other? What do you think? Is it a friendly conversation? Is it not? And just start noticing the emotions, make some predictions about what people are thinking about, because that's what you and I do when we're talking to people. We observe, we start to notice emotionality, we start
Mhm.
making predictions about, is this a good time for me to talk? Is it not? Um,
But
I
Michelle,
know what, yeah.
we see people, especially those on the spectrum, who will do those exercises but really be off. And so encouraging them to observe and interpret. And now they come back telling us things that we see are obviously not the case. What someone was thinking about them or what someone was thinking about another, and their interpretations are just off. So how do you deal with that?
So then we start teaching about what perspective taking is, and we really break it down in terms of perspective. And perspective taking is all inferential. So we have to make sure this person can make inferences. Like Temple Grandin is not great at making these inferences. When you're working with this more subtle group, now we're getting them to make predictions and inferences about what's going on around them. Comic strips are great for reading some of this stuff. I don't know if you remember comic strip conversations, but seeing people in real time. I think we're so busy talking, we forget to step away from that and notice all that's happening when we are just the observer, and that we have to make the inference
Mhm.
of what's happening. You don't literally have to hear someone speak every minute to be able to understand the tone of what's going on around you. But you also have to figure out what's your goal. What do you want to do with this person? And is this at the right time? Is it the right place? Is this the right person to do that with? There's a lot, this is why we call it social thinking. There's a lot of thinking
Yes.
of stepping away and breaking this down, and then starting to think about, what do you think their perspective is?
Mhm.
What's your perspective? And then we not only have it be about what do you think's going on with them, but now flip it. What would somebody think's going on with you?
So okay, so back to the generalization question. If I'm understanding you correctly, I guess we're doing something that's more than specific to what's happening right now, as much as it's exercises of let's learn to take perspective, or let's learn to uh, start to wonder about what other people may be experiencing. Is that what you're
Right.
saying?
Yes.
And is
Yeah.
that what you mean when you talk about social competencies? Do you have a number of competencies or a list of competencies, or is that what you mean by competencies?
The social world's really dynamic, right? One person could, like right now, we're having a pretty serious talk.
Mhm.
This ends in an hour, less than an hour, and we walk into maybe our family lives
Mhm.
with a whole different dynamic, right? You're constantly adapting. The social world is all about adapting to what's going on in the situation with these people based on shared expectations, personal goal, shared goals around that.
Hmm. Okay.
So, I mean, what if you just take your own mind and just think about what each of us does to figure out what's going on around us, you will find the first thing that each of us does. You walk in a coffee shop, what's the first thing you do is you observe.
Mhm.
If everything's as expected, great. But if something seems off kilter, that's where all your attention's going to go, right? Because we constantly take for granted that people operate in a shared environment in a very predictable way.
Predictable, expected way, right?
And when things are unexpected, we tend to pay more attention to that type of thing. So what we don't do, one of the things about social thinking is it's not a punishment-based treatment. It's about just really starting to figure out the landscape in which we live, the social landscape, and being able to infer what's happening with different people at different times, being aware of what your own goal is with people. So like I have people who really want to be with others and they're really upset. This could be an adult, this could be a teenager, a kid, they're really upset that they're always by themselves. And they're really frustrated and they may be lashing out or they may just be, really angry at teachers, classmates, all that kind of stuff. And then when you go observe that person always stands away from everyone else, right? So they're upset they're not included, but they're actually don't realize they're not doing anything to be included.
Right. But you're bringing a whole interesting twist to this, which is how often are our socially deficit kids not resulting from something like a spectrum disorder, but more from timidness, anxiety, social anxiety, and so many other quote unquote diagnoses.
Sure, take the spectrum, because this is, and say, okay, this is one part of our social group spectrum of social competencies. But then where's ADHD fit in? Where does bipolar fit in? Where does schizophrenia fit in? Where does social anxiety disorder? Is social anxiety disorder the driver, or is it the result of not really knowing how to handle yourself with other people in dynamic situations? And so one of the things that I ended up doing was developing spirals of anxiety, spirals of basically those who are doing really well managing their anxiety, and then a spiral of anxiety when your social anxiety is just feeling out of control. And in fact, it's your anxiety that's shutting down your participation. And it may be that, we're pretty, as kindergarteners, early elementary school, it's a pretty inclusive world. At around 3rd grade, the curriculum starts becoming more advanced. There's a lot more interpretation in the curriculum. At the same time, socially, 3rd grade's a time that we start getting much more fussy socially as well, right? The curriculum mirrors our social development. And so
you're talking about the social thinking curriculum? Or you're talking
about academic curriculum.
Academic, okay.
This is the reading comprehension of literature. This is the written expression. Everything becomes more and more advanced. At the same time, our social selves are, if for neurotypical, expected to also be advancing, right? So our critical thinking, we get up to our teenage or our tween years, and now we're dealing with a really messy mind of, of confusion as we march into our more adult years where we're getting better and better at problem solving. This is the typical mind, right? And now we're working with students who are aging, and we have to figure out where they are in this process in terms of their ability to read the situation, not just the people, but also how are they doing in their academics related to the social mind. If you think about a novel is bringing people to life. And what's interesting about novels is that people have problems and dilemmas and emotions. If you're not familiar with how to read that on a person face to face, it's going to be hard for you to apply that knowledge into making sense of what a story is telling you.
That's so interesting. I never thought of that. Do you mean to say that, let's say, somebody who has Asperger's, formerly called Asperger's, or autistic spectrum, is not going to appreciate novels and stories that
No, I would say the higher group, this Asperger's type group, has a better understanding of the roadmap of the world. And one of the things novels does is it freezes it so you can reread a passage to understand it. But if you're getting more into the students who are more literal
Mhm.
and not able to ease, like these are the ones you're talking about, generalization and teach them how to behave and get them to memorize, that group is really going to struggle in their curriculum as they age up. And it's very confusing for parents because this same group tends to be really good at reading decoding at a very young age, right?
And math.
They learn that pattern based learning really great.
Mhm.
And so they're brilliant readers in kindergarten, first, second grade, when it's all about, you know,
Concrete
just
information or
decoding.
decode the
And
read.
so the parents are like, oh, my child's so smart. And then you come to the critical thinking years, third, fourth, fifth, when it's not so much about did you read it? It's more about did you interpret it?
Right.
And then that group is going to really start struggling. And then parents might get very upset, going, well, wait a minute. This must be the teacher's fault because my child never had any academic problems before. A lot of teachers don't know how to explain that the curriculum is actually getting harder and the curriculum is mapped on to the social mind.
Hmm. Wow. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to share before we move on to the next question? Love to hear if anybody has or experience or case question. Michelle, I wanted to ask you, can you share with us what are some common social skill deficits that we may come across? What are some of the most common ones or things for us to be mindful of?
Well, I think the obvious is struggling to use your eyes to relate, right? So in the behavioral world, they call it eye contact.
Mhm.
And they'll try to teach you to look with your eyes, but you don't really know what you're looking at. So you get some very odd staring.
Mhm.
Where with our more subtle and sophisticated group, we call it think with your eyes, and this is where we start teaching the observation part. What are other, I think one of the things that's fairly common, especially with the group I'm working with, is they often have one or two people in their life and kids who they met very young in school and they're very close to, so they look like they're having a really typical social exchange and they're really bonded with this person,
Mhm.
but they're not bonding with anyone else. But people go, well, you know how to do it with him, so just do it with everyone else. But that's a child with a historical friendship, right?
So in other words,
At
they know the intricacies of that friend. They've developed, sort of almost developed it together in that friendship from birth.
Yeah, it's a historical friendship. It's spanned their life.
Mhm.
And so the partners forgive each other more. They're just, open to whatever happens. Um, and then that same person may have just a massive amount. You mentioned social anxiety about sitting in a class and the teacher saying, go find a group, go work in a group. And our kids can be frozen at their chairs going, I don't even know how to do that.
Mhm.
Like the idea of physically moving towards people they don't know, even if they're in the same class with them, is not uncommon that they struggle with that.
So when it comes to something like social anxiety, uh, is there anything that can actually be taught to them if they're anxious because of an anxiety disorder or because of poor self-esteem, right? I just don't believe that the latest expression that it keeps coming up in my therapy room is I don't believe that I don't sense that I'm worthy of taking up space.
Mm,
Why should I
mm,
make noise and other people have to listen to me? Why should I'm
mm.
not worthy or deserving of taking up space. So
Wow.
is there something from a social competency end that can be helpful for the child when they
Yeah.
in
So
terms
how old is the person you're talking about right now?
I mean the person I'm talking about is 40. So
Okay,
and
fair.
and that applies to them not wanting to speak up even among family, close-ish, not their own children, but their own siblings or siblings who are distant from them, and to sit at the table with them and speak up. And they just feel like, why should anybody listen to me? And why should I be worthy of taking up space? I feel so stupid opening my mouth, so I
Hmm.
just keep it shut.
And what's that person's diagnosis?
not something social, more in the self-esteem arena, well, childhood stuff.
Okay, I would, if that person landed at my clinic and we do the number one referral to our clinic are from mental health folks, I would well, first of all, if the person is at any risk of endangering themselves, we would send them back to mental health, right? But if they're willing to start learning about how the social world works, that's exactly what we would do with this person, is not have them do anything to take up space except observe how other people share space and start mapping on how it's working, because a lot of times these folks have had so much anxiety, and anxiety blinds you to noticing what's happening around you. Anxiety makes you go inside yourself.
Yes.
And then you keep watching yourself fail rather than trying to start mapping on what are other people doing. And so choosing situations for that person, like if you had the opportunity to go, into the community or a grocery store, or, and just start noticing what people are doing. Daily living kind of things, not focusing on let's get social, let's get you being with people. Of course, you should talk to people. That's just going to send them right back into social anxiety.
So is this what you mean when you distinguish social skills, behavioral social skills from social competencies? Am I getting that now? You don't want to say, okay, go do exposure,
Right,
get yourself
right,
in social and force yourself and push yourself, which is going to just double down and lock them
right,
in anxiety and have them run for the hills potentially.
right.
Maybe a small percent chance that they'll actually be successful, but instead let them just observe, let them start to relearn their interpretation of what's going on in the social environment,
Yeah,
watching
I
others.
don't know that they may have always been filled with so much anxiety that that whole system is shut down. And so it's really about in safe places where they can observe. And then I would also be working with that person on feelings. So in my work, I separate out the words feelings and emotions. And feelings are what we feel. Emotions are the words we use to label our feelings. And I take away the words I take away the emotion words, and I have these, I have different articles on my website where I offer these strategies. But one of them is I have this little chart, right? So there's an emoticon scale, a line in the middle from neutral. And then I have that person starting to notice their feelings and graph their feelings over like an hour or two. Like if this person's just always negative, his feeling may be below the okay line, but he's noticing he has feelings. So I've had clients who go, I'm never happy. I'm always miserable. I work at one of the, I'm in big tech area here. One of my clients was sent to me and he was like, I'm just always so unhappy. So I started creating this scale for him about how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? How do you feel when you're having breakfast? Blah, blah, blah. And it turned out he wasn't just flatlined unhappy all the time. In fact, one of the things he noticed was he really likes sitting with some people at work who have a good sense of humor, and he just sits there and listens and he thinks it's fun. So he feels good at that moment. And we really start unpacking and moving away from the idea that you're just always feeling so crappy to where is the journey in your feeling day. And then as you start realizing there's a spectrum of feelings that you may be experiencing, like watching a TV show that you enjoy, whatever that is, that you are having some positive emotions. It doesn't have to be big positive. It could be just above the okay line, but your life is not flatlined in a negative place. And so that's one of the, I'm sorry.
No, that's so important. It's so important for the always and never people who are catastrophizing because of this. I'm getting a sense it's because of the overwhelming anxiety that comes up for them that just makes them feel so hopeless.
Right.
And like, no, I'm always, I can't, it's impossible. I never will. But then when you break down the timeline, they can actually see not just as sort of proof. It's not like an evidence, like we're looking to prove them in the court of law, so to say, but it's more like to identify what are the areas that you feel calmer in, or happier in, or more comfortable in, and what are the areas that you feel more stressed
Right,
and avoidant towards. And then once
right,
they have words that they just develop a stronger awareness.
right. And really, this is all around not using words. It's about sensing your feelings and noticing that they shift. This little scale has been pretty successful. This, I call it a feeling journal. And each day you create your own different little feeling journal. And it could be for a couple of hours. If you're more sophisticated, you could do it across, a day, to notice that your feelings are constantly shifting. So one of the things, if you're inside the feeling research, is feelings change. That we literally are not parked. Unless you're massively depressed and in a dangerous place, you could be parked in a very negative, feeling.
Fixed.
But even sorry?
You could be fixed, right? You could be fixed there.
Yeah. But as I shared, when I have someone who's in a very depressed place and really parked there, unless mental health is co-treating with me, I'm not seeing that person on my own. But I find these feelings journals are really helpful for getting people to realize that feelings change, and, oh yeah, I actually did enjoy this. There are times in my day that feel better than others. And we all have negative feelings, but we all have positive feelings too. And what makes us feel positively.
Okay. Michele, you had mentioned your website earlier. Do you mind if I put it in? What is it? If I want to put
It's
it in
just www.socialthinking.com.
social. And where would someone find the feelings journal? Is that a journal that you have? Is it just a notebook or a pad that somebody
I'm
might
just gonna take a moment here and
try to
look at my web.
see if you could share the screen again? I tried opening it up again. If you want to share that slide.
Okay,
I'll
let me
share.
see if I can make that happen. For some reason here, my thing is just coming up with danger signs on it, hazard signs. It's not.
I'm a pretty safe guy.
Sure, I know. I've never seen this before. So I'm sorry, I can't do that, but let me just look for a quick minute. So on our website, you will see that we have online training, and we have live stream events and free webinars, and all of our webinars are free. And we have a large range of them. And I have one called Exploring Our Children's Stress. And I think it's in that one that I go through the feelings journal. I also have one on self-regulation. Have one on the competency model, and that's where you can see what our competency model looks like. But we do a lot on executive functioning and self-regulation. And as part of that, we obviously have to tune into our feelings, and start to understand the journey, and start to understand choices that we have to help ourselves feel in a better place. When I do work with a child who is, I've been brought in to work on a kid who is just an isolated kid. No one talks to him. He hardly ever talks across the whole day. He just looks depressed the whole time. That's a kid I think we've had this horrific shooting. This kid was not a shooter, but I've always been warning schools about, if a kid is sitting by himself for nothing else, for his mental health, we have got to figure out how to make more inclusive practices so that kids are just not by themselves when they feel so, not able to relate. And your kids who are more literal, they're more clueless, so they're not having a problem relating. They're often relating at the wrong time, wrong place. They're kind of puppies bounding about. But the kids who are more sophisticated are the ones who have the greater social anxiety and may be shutting themselves out. And that's where we just want everybody to say, hey, let's figure out, let's let's get leaders in this school to work to include kids who are struggling to feel like there's anyone to be with.
Michelle, let's take a question from our participants. Razy, go ahead.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to say that I use some of your books in my work with middle school students. So thank you so much. I had a question about bullying. First of all, I was curious, like how often do you find that it overlaps with these kids that they're not getting the social nuances? How often does it lead to bullying? And also if you have any tips, because I find that sometimes like I have a hard time, trying to get the kid to understand what not to say or answer back
Right,
to perpetuate the
right.
bullying.
One of the challenges when I'm working with, when you're working with the kids who are obviously odd and awkward, there are some jerks on campus who will bully that kid. Usually there's some kind of system of even their peers who are like, that's not cool, stop it. But the kids who are most at risk are the kids who look the most neurotypical. And one of the challenges with this group is they may be bullied, but they actually may be bullies themselves. And it's a total reciprocal cycle. So when I was brought in to start working with some kids who were bullies and I spent some time with them, I'm like, oh my gosh, this kid is bullying all these other kids. And so started to do some bully awareness of, what's a bully? And yes, you're feeling bullied. I wonder, now we take perspective. I wonder how this other kid feels when you're saying this. We might make a bully scale. We might come up with all kinds of visuals to try, but we don't want to do it out of like, hey, you're bullying, so I'm not going to help you with bullying. It's like, how do we back up and start thinking about how we treat each other? What's the perspective? What's your goal? And some of our kids bully because it's the only way that they can get attention, right? They don't know how to navigate being able to enter into talking to somebody and have just a quiet, calm relationship sharing. And so they think the only way to get attention is to be mean. So that's why, it's a complicated issue. There's not a clear answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Aaron. Go ahead. Oh, we don't hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, now I hear you.
I am actually I'm doing now.
But Aaron, it's very, very low. You gotta somehow get closer.
You hear me now better? Hello?
A tiny bit.
Better now?
You could try if you scream.
So you hear me now?
No, it's no good.
So I guess I will mute myself and I will try to figure out what's going on.
Okay. No? Okay. Michelle, so far, what I've heard from you is that the way that people learn to generalize is through mapping, learning to read the social room, looking around, observing, and coming back with observations. Is there anything more than that?
Yeah. So I'm not going to call that generalization.
Okay.
I'm going to call that adapting. Right? That as you go to different places with different people and you read the situation and you figure out what's going on and you're taking perspective, you're trying to figure out how different people think and feel. You're trying to figure out your own goals. This is the executive functioning and other people's goals. Now you're putting into play different types of interactions. So it's not generalization because it's not memorizing and applying. It's learning, it's attending, interpreting, problem solving, figuring out, should I respond? Should I stay quiet? How do I think that person's thinking? You know how we all watch interactions and we think, oh, that person's holding back on saying something. Clearly they want to say something, but they don't want to foster more negativity or whatever that is.
Okay.
So
And-
that's why we call it adaptations.
And what are some of the other ideas besides learning to observe that help to?
Well, we obviously are going to work on interactions, social, like language-based interactions. So we break that down into comments and questions. And then there's supporting comments. There's questions you use to, we break it down into different types of questions, different types of comments. So for example, I was working with a group of 10, 11-year-old boys, and there was 4 of them. And one of the guys was like saying, "Oh, I went to that cool movie this weekend." And not a single kid said anything in response. And then this other kid said, "It's my birthday today." Literally not a single thing. Nobody said anything to anybody about what each person was trying to contribute to the group. So I just stopped and I go, I wonder what's going on here. He said he went to a great movie. Everybody was quiet. You said it was your birthday. Everybody was quiet. How's that feel? And the kids are like, "This sucks. Like, this doesn't feel good." I'm like, oh, so what could you do differently, each of us, to be part of this? And so that's a supporting comment. Like when you say, "Wow, cool, great,
Right.
Right? And even those little grunts have great value in maintaining social relationships.
Sure.
And participating. So sometimes we get so involved in these long sentences and what do you want to say? But sometimes it's just some really simple add a thought. So like with my getting people warmed up to this, like when I'm working with clients who are hesitant to talk to other people, I'll do a game where each person has to name something. So if I say blue, what do you think of? And that person says sky, and then what does somebody else think of? And we just go on and on and on with people just, you say this word, I have this thought. And what I'm working with them on is we have thoughts about what other people are saying, how it relates to our own life.
So it's cultivating,
And-
just cultivating that awareness.
Sure.
Wow.
Another piece I work on a lot is imagination, our memory and our imagination. So a huge part of conversation is us imagining each other's experiences. And so when one person's talking, the other person is imagining it, but they only imagine it based on their own experience. So like if you were to tell me what you did this weekend, then I would start imagining it, but I would imagine it from my experience, and my experience was different. So that would lead me to say something that would add to the conversation. So that's a way in which we break down conversations into parts and get people to practice adding a thought, asking a question, and we'll do it very mechanically at first, just practicing. Each person talks about something, the other person adds a thought, another person adds a thought, and they extend from words to actually going into sentences.
Okay.
To build that kind of competency in terms of language-based relational language.
That's great. That makes so much sense. Okay, let's take a question from Yakov, and then if we'll get a question from Aaron, and then we'll log off because we have to end by 10 tonight. So
I would like to ask a question on the first thing that you said about observance. So, how does this help the person break the ice? He does, and also when he observes other people, how does he know what he wants to do? Like he sees other people, everybody behaves differently. So how does he get what he wants to do?
Well, what's interesting is when we start with the social observing, it's not really about what he wants or doesn't want. It's just about making sense of the social landscape. It has really been surprising to me over the years, the clients who walk into situations but have not observed the situation. And of course, things go south. And so it's really about building this lens of being able to just create little maps of wherever I'm going. And if you're working with someone with anxiety, it's actually a very calming tool because we don't want anything from you other than from you just to notice who are the people, what do you think they're thinking, what do you think they might be feeling, what might they be planning. and working on these different places. It gives them, I think you guys can relate that when it, we talked about anxiety, the higher anxiety goes up, the more you shut yourself down. So we're going to ask you to start just noticing people. You can do it with screens and YouTube and things like that, but the difference is what you're observing is already defined by a frame. And what I want people to work on is observing a landscape, figuring out what's relevant in this landscape. You go into a coffee shop, what's relevant? Is it where the napkins are held, or is it where the line is? What's important in this landscape to take notice of? And one of the things when we're working with our clients is we actually don't know our clients that well. So gives us a lot of information too about how's this person doing? Are they able to figure this out? And then from there, we start breaking it down more and more. That's where, if you don't know our work well, please go look at many of the free webinars we have, because I really give a lot of webinars for free, and we have a lot of free articles.
Thank you.
Okay,
That was
Aaron, let's try Aaron again.
Hi, do you hear me now?
A little better. Try it.
Okay, so I'm doing groups in schools now on bullying. And I'm using Easy Commons model. It's very, very successful. I'm thinking of doing a social skills group. And actually social thinking. My question is, how should I screen which kid belongs in a social thinking group and which kids shouldn't waste their time?
Well, the big line that I have is how literal a person is. If they struggle with change and transitions, and they appear more awkward and odd, they're often more literal interpreters. And that's where they need more behavioral instruction. But if they appear more nuanced, meaning they appear to look more like the typical kids around them, that's who we tend to do the social thinking with. The kids who have more sophisticated language, because kids who are very literal don't have sophisticated language. But the kids who come in and they're talking, in a robust way, now we're going to get them to start using the social thinking curriculum. And when you mix them together, like if you just group because your schedule's convenient to put everyone in the same room, the higher level kids are going to get frustrated with being in the room with the more literal interpreters. That's where they go. I could teach this kid. I don't want to be in the group with them.
Okay, Malky, you want to go real quick?
Yes, just a quick thing. I've noticed when working with kids on the autistic spectrum, they're very little tolerant, and they have a very, very narrow range of interests. So a lot of the things that you're suggesting, they're just gonna say, oh, that's stupid. And they're not interested in most things.
Yeah, we always have to figure out where to start. And so there are our students who have their kind of obsessional interests. And then there's the social world that goes on around them. And so, it is very personal to who you're working with as to how we help make some entry into that. So someone's a very limited range of interests, still, are they going to school? Are they going in the community? I mean, even crossing the street involves social thinking, right? Because you have to be able to take notice of drivers' intentions. So we're going to find things that are meaningful that person's life is already experiencing, because you could have a narrow range of interests, but unless you're just parked in front of your computer 24/7 and never leaving that chair, you are being exposed to the social world. So now the question is, how do we make our students feel bright? How do we make them feel smart? And that's where I started with, tell me what's going on in this room when you're not on your narrow range of interest, because they exist in the social world. Also depends on their age. The more teenager they are, the more they are starting to go, okay, yeah, I have my narrow range of interest, but I am kind of interested in this other person. you can be on the autism spectrum, but you still have a robust sexuality. And as you're aging up, kids want to learn how to talk to different folks. And so, it's really what's the in, because the social world surrounds us even with our narrow range of interests.
So you're saying rather than just trying to expand their interests, sometimes it may be going with the interest that they have, but to expand that rather than to add more interests.
You can work from their range of interest and work there and expand it. Or you could say we live in a multitude of worlds. Part of your world is your area of interest, and part of your world is, I don't know, how old is the kid you're thinking about?
He's a boy. I think he's about 11.
Okay.
And
And so,
the first part is he's very, very resistant to like anything you tell him. I get two answers. I don't know. I don't know, or that's just stupid.
there is a subgroup of students that we call self-protective. We used to call them resistant social communicators, but that's not PC to call them that, who are very argumentative and very angry about this. And so each one of those we have to work with individually and not put them in the group, but we still work with them on figuring out.
But I will agree, I definitely think it's self-protection. Yeah.
Right. And so this is a kid who's probably noticing that the world's going on around him and he's not succeeding in it. So he's going to pull away from even trying to be part of it.
Okay, thanks.
But then that would be the one that, you go back and you're like, tell me what's going on. Just be my spy. I mean, I say that to kids all the time. I don't get to walk around this school. You're my spy. Tell me what's happening. And that just involves him doing something for you that you're not saying, you need this because you need social skills instruction. That will just shut him down.
Do you have anything?
But I like that. Okay, it makes him feel some degree of success.
Right. And it's an entry. It's what all of us do to enter into the social participation, is to just notice.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have anything for children to read?
I do. What age?
I guess you tell us where we can find it.
On our website, socialbeing.com, you literally will go to our front page of our website. And actually, I lied. You can go to products, scroll on top of products, and it will say early learners, elementary, tweens, teens, young, mature adults, digital products. We have a curriculum that kids really like called Social Detective and Superflex, where we teach you how to be super flexible. And kids are very fond of that curriculum. It's actually has research being done at universities on it. So those are good places to start. We always want to start with motivational materials, obviously, rather than just straight, you've got to learn social skills. And in the fall, we will be actually, in spring, we're coming out with a graphic novels for tweens and teens called Brain Hacks. And it's all about executive functioning, teaching in a graphic novel format.
Okay, Michele Garcia Winner, thank you very much for agreeing to do this and talking to us and sharing this and whetting our appetite. For those of you who are interested, take a look at socialthinking.com and all its resources and free webinars, one after the other. That's cool. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and articles.
And articles and everything you can get your hands on.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in sharing a lot of information for free.
That's great. That's great.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Night.
Bye-bye.